She didn't scream, didn't fight, didn't even raise her voice. Princess Charlotte just said quietly, "Please, you're hurting me." And that was enough, because the guard saw it. He saw Camilla's son gripping her arm, saw the fear in her face, and stepped in before protocol could catch up. But what happened next shook the palace to its foundation, because when Prince William saw the bruises, saw who had left them, he didn't wait, didn't consult the crown, didn't ask permission. He threw Camilla's son out of the palace, permanently. So before we show you the moment loyalty ended and justice began, comment below where in the world you're watching from. Hit subscribe and turn on the bell icon, because this story proves not every guard waits for a command. The early evening hours at Windsor carried a rhythm only those within the palace truly understood. Heels echoed faintly against marble, radios clicked low between clipped instructions, and the air hummed with polished anticipation. Tonight was a diplomatic affair, minor in scale, but major in visibility. Foreign dignitaries, Commonwealth liaisons, a chance for the palace to flex its elegance without breaking a sweat. The reception was scheduled for 7 sharp. By 6, staff had already lined the west foyer with floral arrangements, catering assistants moved like whispers, and polished brass fixtures caught the overhead chandeliers just right. Everything looked effortless, which meant 100 people had worked twice as hard to make it that way. Sergeant Idran Cole, assigned to internal corridor support for the evening, didn't wear that kind of stress on his sleeve. He didn't have sleeves tonight, not in the traditional sense. His formal dress tunic was perfectly creased, gloves snug, brass buttons burnished to gleam. He stood at post outside the east drawing room, tasked with keeping the westbound guest flow uninterrupted. Inside that uniform, his mind was focused, unflinching, until the Wales children came down the corridor, and Charlotte stopped to look at the ballroom doors. She was in a pale navy dress, simple and tailored, hair neatly parted and pinned. Beside her, her younger brothers carried less patience and more restlessness, squirming under the unspoken weight of being nearly royal enough to attend, but not quite. Charlotte, though, carried her disappointment differently. She didn't pout. She didn't protest. She just paused near the base of the columned entryway and glanced toward the golden-lit reception hall. The sounds of laughter and champagne-laced diplomacy floated out. Her hands folded in front of her. She didn't try to go in. She just stood silently. Idran didn't say anything. He just watched. A royal aide approached shortly after and gave a polite reminder. They'd be having their dinner in the family quarters shortly. Charlotte nodded with quiet compliance, then turned, catching Idran's eye for half a second. She gave him a small nod, the kind that said, "I know you saw, but we won't talk about it." She led her brothers back toward the private wing without a word. 10 minutes later, Thomas Parker Bowles arrived. And with him, the weather in the corridor changed. Camilla's son did not require a grand introduction. Those who worked inside the palace had long learned how to adjust when he was in attendance, which was, thankfully, rare. He wasn't royalty, not officially, but the bloodline proximity and his mother's title gave him access and expectation. Tonight, he arrived slightly late. No big announcement. Just a tall man in an over-tailored suit, dark grey with wine undertones, no tie, collar open. A brandy already in hand, not poured here. He'd arrived with it. "Ah," Thomas breathed as he stepped past the first threshold. "Smells like tax money and tradition." One of the junior protocol aides smiled tightly. Another dipped their head. He spotted a familiar face in a nearby uniform and clapped a hand on the man's shoulder. "Still guarding corners, eh? Must be thrilling." He didn't wait for a response. As he entered the reception space, his presence peeled across the room like oil over water. Noticeable, unwelcome to some, tolerated by most. Because to push back meant friction with the Queen Consort. And not many had the stomach for that, not tonight. Idran saw the way staff reacted when Thomas passed. Chin dips, small steps sideways, smiles that never reached the eyes. Well, he'd worked enough private security in the years before his royal assignment to know the profile. Wealth without responsibility, power without title, arrogance without consequence. Thomas didn't need to declare dominance. He wore it like an aftershave. Not long after entering, he began making the rounds with 2 loud laughs and 2 intimate shoulder pats. His drink refreshed often. His jokes got bolder. A small group of staff near the northern gallery tried politely to redirect him toward the designated mingling area. He ignored them. Instead, he glanced down a side hall, the one leading toward the south wing, off limits to guests. "Funny how the most interesting places are always behind the velvet ropes," he muttered. He didn't move that way yet, but Idran clocked it, noted the angle, the lean, the little spark in the eye of a man who didn't like being told no. At 7:42, Charlotte passed through again, this time trailing behind a palace assistant en route to retrieve a forgotten item from the family study. She walked quickly, quietly, eyes down. Thomas saw her. "Ah, little Lottie," he called with a smirk. "Didn't recognize you without a crown." Charlotte froze mid-step, then turned only slightly to give a polite nod. Thomas raised his glass in mock salute. "Off to plot a revolution, are you?" Charlotte gave no answer. She simply turned back and continued walking. Idran noticed the subtle speed increase in her steps. Thomas drained the rest of his brandy and handed the glass to a nearby staff member without looking at them. Then he moved, not toward the drinks, but in the same direction Charlotte had gone. The thing about people like Thomas Parker Bowles was that they didn't start with cruelty. They started with charm, misdirection, an arm around your shoulder, a joke that made you laugh despite yourself. And that's what made it worse, because by the time you realized what was underneath, he was already 3 steps deeper into the room than he should have been. By 8 p.m., the reception was fully underway. Classical quartet, soft lighting, champagne being refilled before it was even half empty. And Thomas? He was holding court in the southern alcove, a brandy glass in one hand and someone else's attention in the other. And I said, "If you're going to seat me next to the Canadian trade envoy again, at least warn me so I can fake a seizure." The 3 guests around him chuckled nervously. One of them, a young attaché from Delhi, looked over his shoulder as if to double-check whether anyone had heard. They had. A nearby footman, uniform stiff, posture flawless, stood just close enough to hear it all without reacting. That was the job. Presence without interference. Witness without judgment. Thomas didn't notice or didn't care. He drained his glass and held it out lazily. "Same again, would you?" The footman hesitated for half a second, then took the glass with a nod and retreated toward the bar. "Good lad," Thomas called after him. Then, turning to the group, "Can't fault the staff. It's the job that's soul-killing." Someone murmured something about the grandeur of the palace. "Oh, the palace is lovely," Thomas said, lifting his arms and spinning halfway. "But you lot don't know what it's like living in the bloody shadow of it. Every meal judged, every jacket buttoned, every comment weighed against 3 centuries of royal decorum." One of the guests tried to pivot the topic toward his writing career. Thomas brushed it off. "Writing's a side hobby," he said. "Surviving this place is the real art form." A senior protocol aide gently approached him then, soft smile, smooth voice. "Mr. Parker Bowles, if I may, the family corridor is currently closed for guest access. We'll have additional refreshments brought to this side shortly." Thomas blinked slowly, cocked his head. "Right. And I was about to steal the silver, I suppose?" "Of course not, sir. Just ensuring flow remains smooth." He offered a crooked smile. "You're very good at saying no without saying it." "We try." He waved the man off with mock salute, and the aide retreated, tense beneath the performance. At that moment, the doors to the family corridor clicked open slightly from the inside, just a sliver. Charlotte stepped out. She hadn't been expected back yet. She moved quickly, likely to retrieve something missed. She was alone, just for a moment. Thomas turned. "Lottie!" he called, too loud. She froze again. He grinned and ambled toward her, adjusting his cuff as he went. "You're not hiding from me, are you?" "Rude." Charlotte gave a short, practised curtsy. "I'm only collecting something, sir." "Sir," he repeated, grinning. "God, you kids are trained like Swiss watches." She said nothing, just waited, hoping he'd move aside. He didn't. You know, he said, stepping slightly closer, if you weren't so buttoned up all the time, you might actually enjoy yourself around here. It's not a prison, you know. Well, unless you're in line for the throne. Charlotte tried to step past him. He extended an arm, not blocking her outright, but enough that she had to pause. I mean it, he continued, tone dipping into something more private. You're not like the rest of them. Bit of Diana in you. Bit of fire. She shifted slightly, trying not to show discomfort. Please, let me pass. He lowered his arm, but leaned in just slightly as she did. You don't have to be so uptight with me. I'm family. She gave no reply, just walked away, faster now. From a corridor post 10 metres away, Sergeant Idren Cole stood frozen in place. He had seen enough to make a mental note, but not enough to make a move. Not yet. But his hand drifted slowly toward the small black booklet clipped to his belt. Not to open it. Not to write. Just to touch it. Just to remind himself that someone else had seen that moment too. The palace hallways were not built for speed. They were built for procession. Wide and echoing, designed to carry the sound of heels and hushed voices like incense through a cathedral. But Charlotte moved through them quickly, slipping past uniformed aides and slow-footed staff, with the precision of someone who had lived in these spaces her whole life. She'd retrieved her tablet from the family study and was halfway back to the private quarters when she heard it. Little one, where are you running off to now? Thomas Parker Bowles. She didn't stop, but her steps faltered, just slightly. He wasn't shouting this time. His tone was soft, casual. That made it worse. He was standing in the cross corridor near the North Conservatory, hands in his pockets, leaning just enough to seem relaxed, but alert. I'm not running, Charlotte replied politely, clutching the tablet against her chest. Just returning to the family wing. Ah, yes, the royal wing. So sacred, so secret, Thomas drawled. Well, as luck would have it, I'm heading that way myself. She shook her head. It's restricted for tonight, sir. That's the thing about restrictions, sweetheart. They're more suggestions when you have the right last name. Charlotte's eyes dropped to the floor, then lifted again. I'd prefer to go alone. Would you now? He stepped closer, not threateningly, just enough to make the space between them feel thinner. He smelled like brandy and cologne, and something underneath, bitterness maybe, or sweat masked in luxury. Charlotte took a measured breath. Please excuse me. Thomas sidestepped, placing himself directly in her path. Do you know what your problem is? He asked, voice suddenly dipping. You've been raised to think everyone will always move for you, that the world revolves around your little curtsy and your little frown, that just because Mummy and Daddy are next in line, everyone's supposed to kneel. Charlotte froze. She didn't understand this kind of attention, mocking, invasive, wrapped in adult malice. It didn't fit anywhere in the palace code she'd been taught. She tried again to sidestep him. He moved with her. Then he reached out and touched her arm. Just fingertips at first, brushing lightly near her elbow. Not rough, not aggressive, but too familiar. Charlotte jerked back, her expression still neutral, but her eyes flared briefly with something just shy of panic. Thomas blinked. What? He asked, smiling crookedly. You think I'm going to hurt you? I didn't say that, she answered. Then why the flinch? You're not supposed to be here, she said quietly. You're not family security. You're not my father, and you're not allowed in this corridor. Thomas's smile twitched. Did you rehearse that, or are you just naturally this cold? Charlotte didn't respond. She stared straight ahead, the same way she did during high-pressure ceremonies, the same way she'd learned to weather photographers' questions, harsh winds, and endless protocol. Thomas tilted his head. Your mother's daughter, through and through. His hand reached again, this time firmer, gripping her lightly by the forearm. And then, Sir. The voice behind him didn't shout, didn't waver. It was Sergeant Idren Cole. Close now, closer than he should have been without alert. Charlotte turned toward him instinctively. Thomas didn't. Sir, Idren repeated, stepping fully into view now, please remove your hand from the princess. Thomas exhaled a humorless breath. Bloody hell, the guards are multiplying. Idren took another step. You're currently in a restricted zone. I'm asking once. Remove your hand. Thomas looked down as if just realizing the contact. He let go, slowly, dramatically. She wasn't objecting, he said. She doesn't have to, Idren replied. Charlotte stepped back, now beside the guard. Thomas raised both hands in mock surrender. Christ, one sip too many, and suddenly I'm a villain. This corridor is not for guests, Idren said. Return to the public wing. Thomas stared at him for a moment, then chuckled. Right, of course. Wouldn't want to contaminate the princess. He turned and walked away, muttering something Idren couldn't quite hear. When he was gone, Idren didn't speak to Charlotte immediately. He simply looked down at her and waited. She adjusted her sleeves, then her grip on the tablet. I didn't like the way he spoke, she said. You don't have to explain it to me, Idren replied. You did everything right. Charlotte looked up, her voice barely above a whisper. Why is he allowed to be here? Idren answered truthfully. Because someone gave him a pass. And then, softer. But that doesn't mean it can't be revoked. He should have been gone. After the corridor incident, Thomas Parker Bowles should have taken the hint, or better yet, a car, and left. But men like him didn't process correction the way others did. They didn't feel embarrassment. They metabolized it as entitlement. By 8:40 p.m, the brandy had gone from background note to forward flare. He'd had more since the corridor. Not poured by staff, but from a bottle he'd retrieved himself, a tucked-away decanter from the blue drawing room he no longer had permission to enter. But no one stopped him. Not yet. The diplomatic reception had begun to taper. Some guests had already departed, satisfied with their wine and words. Others lingered politely in small clusters, aware of the hour and the hierarchy of their presence. And Thomas? Thomas had slipped away. There was a moment, a very brief one, when he stood in front of a locked service door leading to the family wing. 2 security staff stationed there nodded at him. He nodded back. Queen Consort's son, he said plainly, not even slurring. They didn't stop him. He didn't flash ID, didn't produce a code, just walked through the moment one of the guards tapped the override, maybe out of habit, maybe intimidation, maybe neither. It didn't matter. The door clicked open. He entered the space no one had cleared him for. The family lounge was dimly lit and warm, intentionally more relaxed than ceremonial. A scattering of toys tucked neatly into corners, books in small stacks. One of Charlotte's coats lay draped over the edge of a velvet armchair. Charlotte herself stood at the small drinks counter in the far corner, fixing a cup of water with slow precision. She hadn't expected company. When she turned and saw Thomas leaning against the doorway, she stiffened, but didn't run. His smile was thin. Well, look at you, Queen of the Sippy Cups. Charlotte stayed where she was. You're not supposed to be in here. You keep saying that tonight, he replied, stepping in and letting the door swing shut behind him. Maybe you need new material. I'll call someone, she said. No, you won't. His voice was still calm, still measured, but closer now. Because we're family, and family doesn't call security every time we bump into each other. Charlotte moved slightly, placing the counter between them. The cup in her hand trembled just once, then went still. You're drunk. I'm celebrating. There's a difference. You don't belong in here. Neither do you, he said with a bitter edge. Not really. Half your face is Middleton, but you walk around like you were born into marble. Charlotte's throat moved in a silent swallow. Thomas came closer. You think anyone out there gives a damn if you're miserable in here? You think anyone notices you? You're just the silent one, the little one, the one they let stand in photos so it doesn't look too William heavy. I don't want to talk to you, she said, more forcefully now. I don't care, he said. He came around the counter, too close. Charlotte stepped back. I don't want... His hand lashed out and grabbed her wrist. Stop walking away from me when I'm talking to you. It wasn't a full yank. Not enough to topple her, but firm. Pain bloomed immediately in the joint beneath his thumb. Charlotte gasped and tried to pull back. Stop it! Let go! Please! You don't speak to me like that. I am your... Let her go! The voice didn't echo like before. This time it slammed. Thomas turned, still gripping Charlotte's wrist, and saw Sergeant Idran Cole standing in the open lounge doorway, eyes locked, shoulders squared. "I said," the guard repeated, "let her go." Thomas blinked, almost amused. "Oh, for God's sake, you again." He didn't release her. Charlotte's other hand had curled into her cardigan. Her face flushed. She wasn't crying, not yet, but her mouth opened in a silent plea. "Please, you're hurting me." That was all Idran needed. He stepped forward with speed that removed choice from the room. In a single motion, he separated Charlotte from Thomas's grip and placed himself between them. Charlotte backed against the wall, rubbing her arm, trying to breathe through it. Thomas stared. "You've just laid hands on the Queen's son." "You laid hands on a child," Idran said coldly. "I was talking to her." "She said, 'Stop!' You didn't." Thomas's voice raised. "You don't get to..." But then, from both sides of the corridor came the sound of fast-approaching steps. Two members of security, responding to Idran's silent alert, entered with haste. Charlotte hadn't moved. Her breath came in short, shallow bursts. Her eyes darted between Idran and Thomas and the new guards. "I want him removed," Idran said, voice even, as if reading from policy. "He's entered a restricted area. He's made physical contact with the princess, and he's intoxicated." Thomas laughed once, then tried to step forward. "You're finished." But no one moved to defend him, because now everyone had seen. And there was no version of the story where the brandy in his breath and the red marks on Charlotte's wrist could be explained away. Charlotte wasn't crying, and that would come later, maybe. But in that moment, in the tense, breathless seconds after Sergeant Idran Cole pulled her from Thomas Parker Bowles's grasp, she wasn't weeping or wailing. She was trembling. Her small fingers rubbed where his had pressed into her skin, a red ring forming beneath the sleeve of her cardigan. She blinked rapidly, jaw clenched, as though holding herself together by sheer will. Thomas stood unmoving, blinking as if trying to recalibrate what had just happened. "You've got no bloody clue who you're dealing with," he spat. Idran didn't move. "You need to leave this wing. Now." Behind them, the two uniformed guards paused, unsure. Thomas looked back at them and smiled, cold. "You going to arrest me in the Queen's house? Put me in cuffs while my mother's down the hall drinking champagne with foreign dignitaries?" He took a single step forward, not toward Idran, but toward Charlotte again. "You think this child is untouchable just because she's William's?" Idran's hand rose slightly, not to strike, but to signal the two guards behind. "Keep your distance." But Thomas didn't stop. His voice rose. "She's been raised like she's the bloody Virgin Mary. No one's allowed to speak to her unless she curtsies first. And now I'm the monster for asking her to have a civil conversation." "You didn't ask," Idran said evenly. "You cornered. You grabbed. And when she told you to stop..." "She's a child," Thomas barked. "Children don't get to tell adults what to do." That was the moment Charlotte flinched. Not because he raised a hand. He didn't. But because something in his voice cracked open, like a door slamming in a memory, something too close, too practiced. "Stop shouting," she whispered. "Please." Thomas turned to her again. "And you?" And then Idran stepped fully in front of her. Not symbolically, physically. A solid wall of red and brass and black bearskin. "She's under protection," he said. "Mine?" Thomas scoffed. "And I suppose you've got the right to enforce that, over me?" Idran didn't answer, because the answer was already being delivered, by the approaching footsteps thudding hard down the corridor. 3 more security officers rounded the corner at speed, having been dispatched once the altercation code had been flagged by the embedded guard override. One of them looked directly at Idran. "Situation? Child endangerment? Unlawful access? Physical aggression?" The senior officer turned toward Thomas. "You'll come with us, sir." Thomas's jaw clenched. "I will not." He stepped back, shoulders square, defiant. "This is absurd. You can't manhandle me because a child didn't like being told off." "We saw the contact," one of the younger officers said. "There are camera logs from the corridor. Medical team has been dispatched to assess the princess." That changed the room. Thomas didn't quite lose his balance, but his posture shifted, not from guilt, but from calculation. A flicker of realization crossed his features. This might not be containable. "I want a formal hearing," he said. "I want representation. And I want the Queen informed immediately." "Queen Consort's access is limited to external advisory right now," the senior officer replied. "Orders came down after last month's incident in the nursery wing." Thomas turned sharply. "You think my mother won't burn this entire building down for me?" "Let her try," Idran said. "This time we'll let the footage speak first." That's when Charlotte finally spoke again. Her voice was quiet, quieter than anyone expected, but the words were razor clear. "I asked you to let go." Everyone stopped. Thomas turned. "I begged you to let go," she said, "and you didn't." She wasn't trembling anymore. Her eyes were glassy, but her spine was straight. "And that's why you're leaving now." The silence that followed was thick with judgment, not official, not scripted, but real, tangible, and final. Thomas laughed once. A short, bitter sound. Then, as the officers moved in on either side, he let his hands rise loosely. "I hope you all remember this when the headlines come." The guards didn't respond. They simply led him down the corridor, his footsteps no longer confident but clumsy, not from drunkenness, but from something heavier. Charlotte stood still as he disappeared. She didn't speak again. But when Idran knelt beside her and offered his hand, she took it without hesitation. Not as a princess, not as royalty, but as a child, finally protected. There were certain events the palace was built to contain. Medical emergencies, security breaches, even quiet scandals that never left the walls. But this wasn't one of them. Because this one hadn't been whispered about in back corridors. It hadn't been passed along with cautious glances or uncertain phrasing. This one had been seen directly in real time by staff, by officers, and most damningly of all, by a child with no reason to lie. Within 15 minutes of Thomas Parker Bowles being escorted from the family wing, the palace had shifted into something colder than panic. Containment. A soft lockdown was initiated. No sirens, no blaring gates. Just internal codes triggered quietly through the Royal Household Emergency Routing System. Guest movement was frozen under the pretense of an updated schedule. Staff rotation was paused. Doors that typically opened to gloved hands now stayed shut, with subtle magnetic resistance. Charlotte was taken directly to the medical suite inside the East family corridor, not because of visible injury, but because procedure demanded it. She sat quietly on the exam table, while two nurses, both long-time paediatric staff, worked with trained, quiet hands. Her sleeve was gently rolled up. There, against the pale skin of her forearm, were the reddening marks of fingers, spaced too far apart for a child's hand, already beginning to purple at the edge. She didn't cry when they asked her questions. She didn't interrupt, just gave simple answers, one by one. "Yes, he grabbed me. Yes, I asked him to let go. Yes, I was scared." Meanwhile, in a corridor below the east staircase, Sergeant Idran Cole sat in the temporary detainment room. No handcuffs, no weapons, no shouting. Just a chair and a recording system switched off by unanimous discretion. He didn't speak much. When the officer in charge asked if he had anything to add, he simply said, "She was in danger. I acted accordingly." A review committee was already forming, 3 ranking officers from different branches of Royal Protection Services, each summoned silently. None told the full scope until they arrived. The chair of the group, an older commander with 30 years behind him and a knighthood he never liked to mention, reviewed the preliminary witness reports with increasing silence. "Where's the corridor footage?" he finally asked. "Pulled," one of the aides replied. "Already secured, not scrubbed." "Play it." They did. There was no audio, but the video showed everything. Charlotte backing away, Thomas advancing, his hand shooting out, her body recoiling, Idran stepping in, words exchanged. Then the clear physical contact. There was no interpretation required. This wasn't disciplinary. It wasn't misunderstanding. It was aggression. That same video, duplicated and sealed in 2 separate encrypted drives, was being relayed up the chain of command to internal legal, to Windsor security, and within minutes to William's personal staff. That was when the weather shifted. William had been attending a diplomatic engagement just outside London, a planned visit to a military-affiliated school for disadvantaged children. The news reached him via coded dispatch just as he was stepping back into his vehicle. He read the message once, paused, then handed the phone to his aide. "Cancel the rest of today," he said. "Sir." "Now!" The motorcade turned around. Inside the palace, word of the incident was now moving faster than policy could contain it. No formal statement had been made, but whispers had legs. Staff who'd seen the confrontation passed information in fragments, the sight of Charlotte flinching, the tone of Thomas's voice, the calm with which the guard stepped in. When the Queen Consort was finally informed, she didn't react with shock. She reacted with offence. "Where is he?" she asked flatly. "In detainment for now," her aide replied carefully. "And my son?" "Being held, pending review." Her fingers tightened around the edge of the table. "This is political suicide," she whispered. "Do they think they can throw him out like he's disposable? He's family." The aide didn't answer, because by then it was already too late. The corridor footage had been viewed. The medical notes had been filed, and the one person who could silence the entire scandal with a single order was en route, not as a royal, but as a father. The motorcade didn't slow for protocol. There were no ceremonial pauses, no procession of guards at the gate, just 2 black SUVs sweeping through the east entrance at speed, brakes hissing slightly as the lead vehicle came to a sharp stop beside the private wing. The door opened before the engine finished ticking. Prince William stepped out without his jacket, no tie, no aides at his side, just William, not the heir to the throne. Not the polished public face of the monarchy, but a father walking into a palace that had failed to protect his daughter. Inside, the hallway cleared ahead of him like a tide reversing. Staff moved quickly but silently. No one spoke. No one reached out. They saw it in his face. Something pulled tight beneath the surface. Not rage, not yet, but something colder, intent. William reached the East Medical Suite and didn't knock. The door opened for him before he could reach for the handle. An older nurse on the other side, giving a brief, quiet nod. Charlotte sat on the small padded bench near the window, legs dangling over the edge, hands folded in her lap. Her sleeve was rolled up. A cold compress wrapped in cloth lay lightly across her wrist. She looked up the moment he entered. There was no ceremony, no protocol. "Daddy," she said. William crossed the room in 3 strides, crouched immediately, and took her into his arms. Charlotte buried her face in his shoulder. No tears now. They had already come and gone, but her body still shook from the echoes. He held her silently, one hand on the back of her head, the other steady against her back. The nurse quietly stepped out, closing the door behind her. When Charlotte finally pulled back, William didn't press her with questions. He just looked at her wrist. "Does it hurt?" She nodded faintly. "Did you tell him to stop?" "Yes." "Did anyone else try to stop him?" Her mouth pulled in. "Sergeant Cole. He did." William nodded, then stood. His jaw had tightened so hard it looked carved from stone. "Where is Thomas Parker Bowles?" he asked aloud. One of the attending officers in the hall answered immediately. "Currently held in private detainment in the West Security Wing, sir." "Under formal arrest?" "No, sir. Pending review." William looked to the aide beside him. "Get me the footage." The footage was ready. The palace team had prepared it for high-clearance review within the hour. No edits, no delay. William entered the control room with 2 officers, 1 legal advisor, and no press staff. The screen came alive in the soft blue glow of night cycle surveillance. There was Charlotte, standing by the counter, her face unreadable, but her posture unmistakably guarded. Then Thomas entered. William didn't speak as the footage unfolded. He didn't flinch when he saw Thomas close the distance. Didn't blink when he saw the hand snap forward and grip Charlotte's arm, and when her body twisted slightly, trying to pull away, he breathed once slowly through his nose. Sergeant Cole appeared. Intervention, separation, confrontation. Security flooded in. The footage ended. William stood silent for 3 seconds. Then he turned toward the senior security advisor in the room. "I want access logs. Everyone who let him into that wing, everyone who didn't stop him. And I want Sergeant Cole released immediately." "Sir, there's still protocol." "I am protocol," William snapped. It wasn't a shout. It was quieter than that, which made it more dangerous. "I will speak to my stepbrother now." The West Security Wing wasn't designed for royalty. It was cold, professional, bare walls and reinforced doors. The kind of place built for neutral containment, somewhere between military utility and bureaucratic invisibility. Thomas Parker Bowles sat slouched in a grey chair, one ankle over the opposite knee, still reeking faintly of drink, but sober enough to know what was coming. When William entered the room, the guard stationed inside stepped out without being told. Just the two of them now. "You laid hands on my daughter," William said. Thomas smirked. "Barely." William didn't move. "You made her afraid to walk through her own home." Thomas shrugged. "You're overreacting. She was rude. I corrected her." "She told you to stop. You didn't?" "It wasn't a beating. You don't have to bruise a child to damage them." Thomas stood, attempting confidence. "This is political, and you know it. You've been waiting for a reason to shove me out. You just found one." William stepped forward. "I don't need a reason," he said. "I have a daughter with marks on her arm and fear in her voice. That's enough." Thomas's face hardened. "If you think Camilla's going to let this pass—" "She already lost the room," William cut in. "You just made sure she lost the rest. Then, you are no longer welcome on palace grounds. You are no longer permitted contact with any member of the Wales children. If you attempt either formally or informally, you will be intercepted." "And what if I refuse?" William smiled for the first time. "Then I'll release the footage." That ended it. There was no more fight left. Not from Thomas. Not from the institution trying desperately to look the other way. Because now the future king had seen the past too clearly to ignore it. The morning light hadn't yet touched the western gates when Thomas Parker Bowles was escorted out of the palace. No cameras waited for him. No statement had been issued. No press leak had reached the tabloids. Not yet. But inside those stone walls, within the concentric circles of power and silence, everyone knew what had happened, and everyone knew why he was leaving. William didn't order a grand announcement. He didn't summon aides to craft a damage control plan. He simply made the decision, and made sure it was carried out. Personally. Thomas was given 10 minutes to collect his belongings. No rooms were reopened for him. No assistance offered. A simple black duffel bag was handed to him by a steward who didn't meet his eye. His mother wasn't there. Camilla had been told in a closed meeting just an hour earlier. She had protested at first, not out of disbelief, but out of reflex. A mother defending the son she believed the world never gave a fair seat at the table. "He didn't mean harm," she'd said. "He left bruises," William replied. "Well, he was raised in this environment. He doesn't understand the lines like we do. He's 49. She hadn't answered that. When William told her what the security footage showed, not just the grab, but the tone, the mocking presence, the refusal to step away even after a child asked him to, she fell silent. "He is to be removed," William said, "without public interference, without further incidents." "You mean quietly?" "I mean permanently." She stared at him for a long moment. "You're not just punishing him," she said softly. "You're punishing me." William's response was calm, icy. "No," he said, "that part you did yourself." And with that, she'd been dismissed, not as queen consort, but as a mother whose defence came too late. Now, as the staff stood back and the iron service gate unlatched with a dull mechanical groan, Thomas stepped into the courtyard. He looked tired, his usual swagger diluted to something tighter, quieter. Not remorse, but something closer to recognition, that the rules he had danced around for decades had finally found their edge. Two uniformed officers followed at a distance, not touching him, not dragging, just present. Because the message wasn't about containment, it was about finality. He crossed the gravel slowly. A black car idled near the edge of the property, arranged hours earlier by a liaison officer under William's direct instruction. No driver stepped out to greet him. The rear door was unlocked, nothing more. Thomas turned once, looking back toward the palace facade. Not to admire it, but to see, maybe for the first time, just how far away the windows looked now. He climbed in. The car pulled away. The gate closed behind him. And with it, the door to a chapter that had never truly belonged to him. Not by birth, not by blood, and now, not even by courtesy. Inside the palace, quiet returned like a curtain being drawn. But no one moved quite the same after that. There was a pause in every step, a glance in every doorway, a reassessment of where the lines were and who was finally willing to enforce them. Later that morning in the East Security Office, Sergeant Idran Cole stood at attention as 3 senior officers reviewed his case. They read from reports, reviewed the footage again, read the witness testimonies, especially Charlotte's. No reprimand was issued. No protocol citation given. Just one sentence from the chairman of the review board. "You did what the uniform exists for." Moments later, William entered the room and the officers stood. Idran remained steady. William gestured for privacy. The others exited quietly, leaving only the 2 of them. "I heard what you did," William said, "what you risked." Idran didn't respond at first. "I had no choice," he said finally. William nodded once. "You did," he said. "You just chose correctly." He reached into his pocket and placed a folded document on the table beside them. A direct reinstatement order, signed personally. "Effective immediately," he said. "You'll report to my children's detail, directly." Idran blinked once. "Sir?" "That's not a request," William added. "It's an apology, from the system that hesitated while you acted." There were no further words between them, just a handshake, firm, silent, between 2 men who understood that some lines can't be crossed, and others must be drawn in stone. Camilla didn't knock. She stepped into the palace crisis room with her spine locked and her chin tilted, not with grief, but with fury. Not because she had been kept uninformed, but because she hadn't been able to control it. Her son was gone, and someone would pay for it. Across the table sat 2 members of the Royal Household Security Advisory Council, a legal liaison, and an empty chair where the Home Office observer had just left to review additional files. In truth, no one wanted to be there when Camilla entered. "I want Sergeant Cole suspended," she said flatly. The room held still. One of the Security Council members spoke gently, like diffusing a landmine. "Your Majesty, he manhandled my son, laid hands on him. That is a breach of every security protocol this institution is built on." "He intervened," the advisor replied calmly, "to protect a royal child. My son is family." "Your son was drunk," said a different voice, quiet but sharp. Camilla turned, but Prince William stood in the doorway, arms folded, not flanked by staff, no document in hand, just standing, listening. "You expelled him," Camilla said. "I did," William replied, "and I'll do it again if he ever sets foot near my children." Camilla's lip curled, more insulted than shocked. "You think this palace is yours to govern?" No, William said, but protecting my daughter is. He's your stepbrother. And Charlotte is my blood. A beat. Then Camilla's tone dropped, low, private, surgical. He has faults, she said, but you've always looked for ways to punish me. William didn't flinch. I didn't record the footage. You used it. I responded to it. You're only doing this to remind me who'll wear the crown next. No, he said. I'm doing this so the man who made my daughter beg to be let go doesn't walk these halls like he owns them. Camilla stepped forward, eyes flashing. You've humiliated me. You've broken rank. You let a guard overstep every chain of command, and now The guard, William cut in, saved your legacy from worse headlines than you can imagine. He stepped toward the table and dropped a simple cream-coloured folder. Inside, witness statements, still images, a timeline that no PR firm could spin. Camilla stared at it, but didn't touch it. William didn't need her to. Your influence in this palace, he said, ends where my children's safety begins. Then, as if dismissing her, not cruelly but definitively, he turned to the council. Has the guard been reinstated? Yes, sir, one of them replied. Charges cleared entirely. Good, William said. Then this meeting is over. Camilla remained in place as the chairs scraped softly and the room emptied around her. No one offered her comfort. No one asked her thoughts. And when she looked up again, William was gone. The palace returned to stillness, but not silence, because silence could be ignored. This was different. This was the kind of stillness that lingered in corridors, the kind that made staff walk with straighter backs and speak with gentler tones around the Wales children. It wasn't fear, it was awareness. The kind that follows after someone finally says what everyone else had been thinking. Charlotte was back in her suite by late afternoon, not isolated, not hidden, simply watched over, not by protocol, by care. William had been firm that the regularity of her routine would resume, but under new definitions of normal. Her tutors were informed, her brothers kept close. A quiet ripple of protective instinct passed through the family wing. And at the centre of it, Charlotte moved calmly, not shaken, not scared anymore. Because she had seen someone step between her and danger. And that changes something in a child forever. Sergeant Idren Cole stood at post later that evening, now reassigned, per official notice, to the Internal Family Protection Detail. Uniform sharp, posture composed. He hadn't expected to see her again that day. But just before the clock struck 7, Charlotte approached the corridor alone, not rushed, not escorted, just walking toward him with a small folded piece of paper in one hand. He didn't move until she was close enough to speak. She looked up. I wrote a thank you, she said simply. She held out the folded note. It was small, handwritten, no royal stationery, just a child's simple gesture, sincere and quiet. Idren accepted it wordlessly, offering a respectful nod. I'm glad you were there, she added. He wanted to say something profound, but instead all he said was, so am I. She gave the smallest smile, barely visible but real, and then turned and disappeared around the corridor again. No guards flanked her, because she didn't need them anymore. Later that night, just before the private wing's interior doors were secured, Idren received a direct call from William's aide. The Prince would like a word, the voice said. He followed the aide through the stone hallway, across the gallery, and into the personal library. Not the grand one reserved for state meetings, but the one tucked behind William's quarters. A place for thought, not performance. William stood near the fireplace, no blazer, no aides in sight. He gestured to the low table. 2 glasses, 1 bottle of Dalwhinnie. Do you drink? William asked. Yes, sir. Then sit. They didn't toast, didn't make small talk, just sat, a prince and a guard, and drank in the silence of the only room in the palace that didn't echo. After the first sip, William spoke. She didn't cry. Idran nodded slowly. She didn't break. She thanked you. She did. William stared into the fire for a moment. I owe you more than reinstatement, he said. Idran shook his head. I didn't do it for thanks. I know, William said. That's exactly why you deserve it. They didn't speak for a while after that, and when they finally stood, William extended his hand. No fanfare, no title, just a man saying thank you to another. Idran took it. And just like that, the night ended. Not with ceremony, not with applause, but with something deeper, respect, earned, silently, permanently. But here's what we want to know from you. If you were the guard in that moment, would you have stepped in? Should Thomas have been banned permanently? Or does family still deserve second chances? Drop your thoughts in the comments. We read every single one. Hit like if this story hit you. Subscribe and turn on the bell so you don't miss tomorrow's episode. Share this with someone who still thinks titles protect people. 2 more powerful stories are now on your screen. Watch those next, and we'll see you tomorrow. Same time, brand new truth.